Vanessa is a senior media executive with expertise as a commissioner, content strategist, and international distributor. She's been a key player in the launch and development of some very impressive global brands, including the Smithsonian Channel, BBC Earth, HGTV, and National Geographic. And you may also have seen her in her previous role at Blue Ant Media, and also with previous work at Shaw, CanWest, Alliance Atlantis. But she is here in her context of SVP at Vice Studio Canada, where she began her role last September. Now, this role also reflects more broadly on some changes that have been happening at Vice Media, and here to help us walk through that is Vanessa. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Okay, good. I'm just checking that I can drive this technology. It's always questionable, but thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to this, and I think a lot of what Angela introduced is recognizing the many, many changes that have happened at Vice. And I, having only, as she mentioned, joined in late September, a lot of it is still very new to me, so I'll do my very best to try and kind of walk everybody through some of the things that have been going on, and now it just disappears, but hopefully, okay, you guys put it back, thank you. So basically just to touch on, really highlight the key things, because Vice, of course, is a global brand, and I'm not gonna give you the full deep dive into everything global, because this is all access, and we're here to talk about opportunities in Canada. But the idea being that there have been quite a few changes that have really reset the company. And while you probably have seen, many of you might have attended where Vice has been present in the past, there have been significant changes specifically to the Canadian office. But speaking from a global perspective, of course, Nancy Dubuc came in basically in May, and then just before her, Dom Delport came in March, really as the two top leads to be running the company, Nancy at the very, very top. And people who don't know Nancy, I strongly suggest that you look up her name and do a little bit of research, because she is a highly, highly impressive executive that, of course, was running the A&E networks for many, many years and took them to massive international success. Dom Delport came from more of the advertising agency, running Havas and various other brands, and so he really brings a very senior expertise from digital agency and basically revenue strategy to the company. Then from the Canadian perspective, joining more officially in June was Naveen Prasad, who has a deep expertise in distribution and film and running companies from Elevation Pictures to a few other ones that he's was involved with right before joining Vice, and then myself in September. So that's just kind of a very quick overview, but there's a lot of really talented people across the globe, which I think I'll just quickly jump into speaking, and then I know you're gonna ask me my question. Angela's driving this, and I'm just not gonna lead this whole thing, and I promise it's not gonna be a big PowerPoint, because I'm not gonna talk to everything, it's just there for you guys to absorb. But the key thing of what Nancy wanted to do, which really speaks to a bit more of what Canada's focused on, is talk about it as one Vice. So that's a big driver for how we're working with our international offices and speaking to the global reach. Of course, we are a very big company, and in fact, I think it says 35 offices with 2,500 people. I think it's closer to about 3,000. So that's a pretty big scope, and while we do, it can come back to how we use our international offices and working together, but that's what we're dealing with when you talk about Vice Media, and then Canada in Toronto and Montreal is a segment of that.
And I was going to say that the senior leadership really reflects the three key pillars of Vice, and that does take into account a creative agency, digital, very thriving digital business, news, and of course, the studio part of this. And we're here to really understand what the opportunities are in this integrated environment for producers in the studio.
Okay, well, so to go a little deeper into what Angela just mentioned, of course, this is a snapshot of what the Canadian offices offer. So I say this very honestly, and I welcome any kind of questions about this, and we're here to clarify any market confusion, because I joined Vice in September. I had a ton of questions in terms of the structure and the setup. Having worked at all those other places, like, formerly Blue Ant and then Shaw before that, I came and watched Vice launch in the Canadian marketplace like many of you did, and it changed. It is no longer a network in Canada. There is no Viceland TV channel in Canada. There is no more licensing Viceland content out of the Canadian office. From a global perspective, there is a Viceland channel, and it's very much part of the brand, but it's not in Canada, and with that, that was a big change for the Canadian market. So this is a snapshot in terms of in Canadian office, and Vice, of course, being most known for being a digital company, there's news and editorial running out of that, and they work with the global offices. There is basically Vice Digital, which is the digital platform, and you can see how many videos it produces from a global perspective. On our owned and operated digital platforms, we reach about 27 million monthly views. If you start to extend that number to all of the social platforms that we partner with, that number expands like tremendously. And then Virtue, which is our in-house content agency, which also has offices globally. Within the digital group, there's also digital sales, and then of course there's studios. So that again is no longer a TV channel, and while studios is the most practical way to think about it for this conversation, but it extends much further, is it's a production company. We are a production company that crosses all genres. Of course, we're working in the digital space, but or in terms of maybe call it short form, and I know that was a topic of conversation in the last panel. But we are working in documentary feature, factual. We are working in film, scripted, comedy, and feature film for theatrical release. It goes across the board, and that's where we tap into our global offices to be able to help amplify that. We can certainly want to dive in a bit more in terms of what the Canadian market offers, but this gives you the biggest snapshot of what is Vice Canada. So one of the key things, Angela, you just cut me off if I'm talking too much. You know you can do that.
You're doing a great job.
But I think this speaks a bit more to how Canada's working right now in terms of our partnerships. I can only see it sideways, so I have to cheat on my notes here to make sure I'm talking to the right slide. But the key being, we have all these relationships, and these relationships extend much further if I was here talking a bit more about the global scope of it. But of course, we do have a relationship with Bell in that we've got basically a first look deal for Bell services. That goes across Crave, that goes across Snackable TV from the digital scope, and then it also goes across MTV1, MTV2, and Gusto at this point. But that is Bell's, that is a first look deal for Viceland content that is coming out of all of the production offices producing for Viceland. It's a first look deal that goes to Bell. It is not a channel deal, and that we manage out of the Canadian office. So that's something that I think I will say generally, just based on the kinds of conversations that I engage in with independent producers, creators, and other broadcasters, I think there has been some confusion in terms of, did the Rogers deal just be replaced by the Bell deal? And I'm here to say, no, that's not the case. Those are two very, very different deals. And Bell is a new relationship for the Canadian office, but a much different one. And then, sorry.
No,
Yeah.
go ahead.
And then, of course, from other relationships that we have, we are in production with CBC. In fact, CBC Gem. Zach was just talking about that earlier, but on the unscripted side, not on the scripted side. And we're working with CGTN, and of course, we do have a production actually with Bell, specifically for their Crave TMN platform, on a feature-length documentary. So we can get into a bit more of the types of things that we're working with, but I think again, speaking to a bit of what Canada oversees, we manage output deals, we manage rights and clearances, we manage, function as a true production office, and then this deal in particular with Bell is just one of the pieces that we manage, but not as a licensing body.
So there are many partnerships, many opportunities across different platforms. I think the burning question in the room is, what does this mean for the content producers that are here today? And when you say you're a production studio, how does that relationship work with the independent production community?
Well, I think the biggest opportunity, and I'll just go back to this one. I think so. Here's the I talked about some of the shows that we're working on, and I can go into those a bit more. There is a big opportunity to the digital play of what is most known for Vice, that all of that content being created, there is so much coming out of that machine that is absolutely what launched Vice into the global sphere about being a digital service. That's IP, that's basically, it's an incubator for where are the ideas, and where are they trending, and how are they resonating with audience. And we can use that to create original IP that we can be producing for any of the platforms in Canada and abroad. And our goal is absolutely, as a producer, in the most traditional sense, is to be creating content that, out of Vice Studios, that will work for be it Canadian platforms like CBC, like Bell, be it like Chorus, or international from other specialty channels and platforms like Netflix, Hulu, and international co-productions is absolutely a core focus of ours. So there's developing original IP in-house and using everything that is what is the Vice media platform to be able to develop those and create original ideas, that we have the actual research in the background and all of the information to be able to present these ideas as why these are ideas that would actually hit a demographic, why we think they're resonating, why we think that they're powerful ideas. Then there's working with creators such as yourself on developing and working on co-productions, basically working with third-party producers and creators that have ideas but need perhaps Vice Studio and its infrastructure, from front end and creative help along the way, from development assistance, we're also a post-production facility. We have the entire production studio capabilities, so we work with creative on going back to the genres across that we're working on, developing factual, scripted, documentary, and so on. I think one of the other areas that we work with our international offices is, in LA, we have our head of films and our head of scripted sit in the LA office. That's to say, we, of course, want to be developing original concepts that can live in Canada and sit with platforms and broadcasters in Canada. But we will use the weight of our LA office and their connections from bringing writers, creators, showrunners to projects that we know can bring the weight that'll help carry them forward to international success. And our goal, like other producers, is to create projects that can find a home in Canada and be a big success, can tap into the fantastic funding that is in this country and be able to bring new content to platforms, but absolutely see them go on to have an international success. They need to, we want to be seeing our formats in Canada extend to the global reach. And I think as much as we can tap into our international offices to help those relationships, further those relationships, that's our goal with having such an international scope for Vice.
So when you're talking about developing content for your audience, do you have an audience in mind that you're really trying to address specifically?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think there's as a Vice the brand, obviously it's it was described as a youth digital brand, and I think that word youth has been dropped out of its statement, and I think the word digital is also being dropped, and I don't want to speak from a corporate communications, but just as we're all talking about what exactly is digital and what does that look like and feel like, I think Vice absolutely speaks to a certain segment and speaks very aggressively and very successfully to that segment in terms of be it Gen Z or millennial, but it is a multi-generational viewpoint in terms of how that brand is creating content. And I think a good example of that would be there is Vice News online. And if anybody has the app or follows it, you know what kind of segments those are, you know what kind of stories we follow, the approach, and how that works in terms of the bite-sized pieces that you're getting. Then you can go to HBO. You can see it in Canada, but you can also, in the US, the relationship is with HBO in the US. There's Vice on HBO. That is a broader extension of a news-type program that absolutely is speaking in a production manner, in a production sense, to perhaps an older demographic that wouldn't be watching that same program on digital. It's not the same copycat program. So there is always a multi-generational viewpoint to how we're producing content. And I think you will get, if produced out of Vice IP, you will get a perspective that fits within the Vice brand and the Vice attitude and the Vice DNA that has that authentic, enlightening, empowerment, entertainment. You can throw a bunch of adjectives at it that I think speak to what most people associate with Vice. But more importantly, if we're creating a show like, let me go over here, we're creating a show like Good People that we're doing for CBC, that was being done for CBC. We pitched that show actually to CBC Mainnet with our host, Mark Sakamoto. It was pitched as a half-hour series, and it was in cooperation with CBC that it was developed, and it was in cooperation with CBC that show turned into actually a different format for its GEM platform. So that wasn't Vice saying it's our way and this is the way. That was us having a cooperative and traditional producer broadcaster relationship in terms of developing the right concept that fits those platforms. So to the, it's a very long answer to your question, because I think Vice has a specific style that it's most known for, and that is absolutely the DNA of the company, and it will continue to be so much of what represents that international brand. But Studios is to produce premium original content that can speak to Canadian audiences, but also global audiences very successfully.
It's never a simple answer. You'd mentioned IP, and I'm curious how you work with independent producers with regard to IP and ownership.
So again, I can't speak to too much legacy, having only been with the company since September, but I would say that it is back to, we can develop IP out of Vice's ecosystem, and that'll be something we take to marketplace, and we'll bring in creators to work with us on that are most suited to those types of projects. We have people in-house, but we want to work with independent producers from across the country. Then we will work with third-party producers that might have any shape and size of a structure, and they might look to Vice to say, what can you guys bring to the project? And I think I go to those types of relationships can take every shape and size, but going back a bit to, let me see if it's kind of a bit here in terms of we are a production studio, so with that, we've got all the front end production offices we can work. We not only have production offices, we've got an entire facility from studio to post-production that we can bring to, say, a co-production opportunity with a third-party producer. We've got all the rights and clearances and everything that we can bring from a global scale, from music E&O to archival for a project. That is all built within the ecosystem of everything that is part of Vice. We've got producers on hand that we can bring to a project. We can add creative. We can be part of the development. We can be part of the pitch. We can be part of the licensing. Every deal is unique, and there's examples that go across some of our other offices that go into scripted, that go into film, and are now going into factual. So it's hard to just put an exact, point on how those relationships work, but the point is we would work collaboratively with the producer on whatever the project might be, with the view of taking a shared IP perspective, and whatever that scope of deal turns into, it's unique to obviously where that project is at that time.
Right. We have 5 minutes left. This conversation is going way too quickly. We talked for hours when we chatted earlier. So with that 5 minutes, I would love to see if there are some questions. If you're open to that?
I'm open.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hi.
So the question is about how you are responding to pitches that include diversity.
Yes, sorry, I
casts,
just want to
or-
make sure I'm understanding your question. So is it how to pitch programs with diversity, or are we accepting pitches with diversity? Okay, okay. Yeah, well, no, and I think, so going back to accepting pitches, if working from a co-production standpoint, of course, I'd always be interested in hearing people's ideas. I think it's a good question. I wish I could answer it in that, how do you kind of cross that threshold? Because I think bringing diversity, bringing gender parity to projects, bringing inclusion from all senses is a key component of everything that we are representing, and that's on a global scale. So I would actually, I guess I want to answer your question fairly, but I think I want to make sure that if you believe it's part of your project and it's absolutely representative and needs to be part of that creative, that what you're backing up, I don't know what the magic in terms of who you're pitching it to and how to actually cross that line, but I think you have to absolutely stick with what you believe is the right, be it casting from both the creative or talent that you're bringing to a project, and make sure that you just find a way to push that forward. And maybe we can talk offhand in terms of specific examples that you face, because I know in speaking with a lot of broadcasters that I know in terms of, and also funding, it is a key requirement that if producers aren't bringing gender parity to projects, if they're not bringing diversity in terms of cast, both on and off screen, projects actually might not move forward. Like, we need to move the needle forward. So I think there's a key requirement. So I would hope actually people aren't receiving resistance to it. In fact, there's pushback in that we're not being aggressive enough in some cases.
Thank you. Any other questions? I cannot see, so wave madly. I'm going to start pointing to people in a minute.
There's people waving.
There's somebody
jumping.
waving over there. What's your job?
My boss would say to make money for Vice, but I think that's a lot of our jobs. I think it is to oversee the creative direction of the studio efforts from both original IP, third-party co-productions, and post-production offerings across the entire business. So I don't want to, I know we're out of time, but I just want to quickly show this one. No, we're off the slides. It's okay. The idea, if this slide were to come up, the idea being is, so we have a post-production studio, let's just put it that way. I won't get into all the technical details, but that studio is, that service is servicing all of the original productions, all of the digital productions, all of the virtue and agency productions that are going through the Vice ecosystem. We're also working with third-party producers are going through there. We've got agency, we've got creative, we've got third-party happening in that. So part of my job is to oversee that with our head of technical operations. We have a full studio. We're actually, if people read some of the press, there's a new show going out of the New York office, the headquarters for Vice Land, called Vice Live, 4 nights a week, starting in very shortly in another month. Vice Live, they're gonna be live for 4 nights a week for 2 hours. Our office is actually doing live shoots and live hits from them. We're completely wired in our facility to be able to go live from any desk, any point in the building, be it the kitchen, just not the bathroom. That's the only place we can't. So it's to oversee those efforts. It's to oversee the crews that are on production, and then working with mostly our LA team most closely to try and kickstart new development and new IP that'll be in the marketplace.
So really, for producers and content creators who are looking to have a lot more bang for their proverbial buck by partnering with a company that's integrated and has so many different options to support the creators, they should come and chat with you.
They should. And I will
Excellent.
do my best to get back to you as quickly as possible. Absolutely.
And I can say she's very approachable, so don't be afraid.